Now we're recording, and welcome everyone to this brown bag. Today we will hear a presentation about developer velocity from Tibi from Microsoft, and welcome, and you can please introduce yourself a little bit.
Thank you. Hello. So yeah, I'm Tibi. I'm working for Microsoft. I think that I don't think that does say too much about me. But I've been in this industry for almost 30 years now. I started as I started with Pascal, then assembler, then C, then C++, and then Java, and then C#. So, and then I would say my career as a developer stopped more or less. But I've been working both as a Java developer, and working as well with the Jfokus team in Stockholm. I was one of the worldwide product focus team. I think that's my one connection to Java world, I would say. And I still know a lot of people working in, working with Java and working, former colleagues of mine that are still working with other companies. And there are some people left at Oracle. But I left exactly when Oracle acquired Bea Systems, actually, and I started to go back to Microsoft. I've been working with Microsoft technologies for 25 years, and I always said I would never work for those big companies like Oracle and Microsoft. And apparently, Microsoft won because 6 months ago I decided to join them. And prior to joining them, I was working both as a software developer lead and as a CTO for a company in Copenhagen. I'm based in Helsingborg. I used to live in Stockholm for 15 years. And we moved here about 2 years ago. And in between Stockholm and Helsingborg, we moved around the world, like Bermuda, Cayman Islands, Tenerife, London, Romania for a while, where I'm originally from. So I've been doing a lot of development, and one of the things that I've always seen, was that we pretty much suck at communicating. Let's face it, the developer and the business side are not really known for their communication skills, at least intercommunication skills. Like the developers know how to communicate with each other, or at least wink at each other, so they understand the signals like Morse and stuff. But when it comes to communicating outside, we always had issues. So we tried different things. Like the first thing we tried was, we invented Agiles and the Scrum and all those kind of, I would say kind of processes to overcome processes, and put people first. But we still had processes in place and still process thinking most of the time. And while this was good for intercommunication, between developers and having developers doing the right thing, we still had an issue with communicating with other technical people. Like we had problems communicating with operation teams. So that's why the next natural step was for us to be to create something that is now called or is known as a DevOps. Where the whole idea, it's not that it's a technology, it's not like what we see out there, people hiring DevOps engineers. Because I don't think that's a title. I don't think that's, you are not working as a translator. You don't have to be an in-betweener. DevOps should be more or less a culture, should be a way of thinking, should be a way of how, of doing the things. And the whole idea was to smooth those communication problems. But we still have an issue, I would say, communicating with the business. And for us, this creates, we do have a lot of problems when it comes to trying to tell the business what exactly we are doing and what exactly we are trying to do. So what happened and what I will talk about today is something called developer velocity. Developer velocity or developer velocity index was it's a number, I would say. But the way to calculate this number was created by McKinsey. And they came out with a report in this April, where they would actually they started to talk about about what makes a company successful. So they had a lot of interviews and a lot of surveys, and they went up with businesses, and they tried to figure out what is happening. And they had a good reason for that, because if you look at the companies today, every single company wants to actually digitally transform. If you look at the title people have today and what they are working with, there are over 20 million software engineers worldwide. So there are people, in these classical companies like Microsoft and Oracle that are working, developing things, but there are, like more or less every single company now has a development department. They are doing development internally. And if you look at, the type of companies, more than half of them are not tech companies. Like, if we use Amazon as an example, Amazon didn't ever start as a technical company. They started as a, bookstore online. And everybody laughed at them, but they were I would say, the first ones to do a digital transformation, to make sure that they could take the brick and mortar type of stores and transform them into digital ones. And doing that, they realized the bigger value, having access to a lot of other technologies and making other people getting access to them. So what developer velocity is, at the end of the day, it's a thought leadership. It's how should you think about, about your digital strategy, and how can you act as a company? How can you act as a software company? So what you want to do actually as at a company, you want to make sure that your developers can build productively, they can collaborate very well in any secure manner, and they can scale the innovation of what your company is doing. So, but the developer velocity, although the name implies speed, it's not about speed, or it's not just about speed. It's actually it's about unlocking this innovation that the developers can bring to the table in order to have a better business outcome. And again, coming back to the things that I said, having better communication, and what McKinsey actually tried to do at the end of the day was to prove their hypothesis. A company with higher developer velocity would do better at the business results. And then when they did this, then they look at the companies and they start to ask the companies about three key key parts. So whenever we talked about, when we talked about agile, when we talked about DevOps, when we talk now about developer velocity, it's always about the three pillars, which I like to call them PPTs. It's not the PowerPoint, but it's people, processes, and technologies. Or as I have it here, it's technology, working practices, and organizational enablement. So people or culture, organizational enablement, those were the things that the McKinsey thought they will bring a value. So they talked with 440 organizations, and they interviewed their senior executives. They looked at countries with a lot of development, and they looked at all the sectors. So it wasn't only technology; it was as well. They looked at finance. They looked at manufacturing. So they looked at also a lot of those industries. They didn't really have to be purely technological ones. And what they observe is actually that there is a correlation. So the survey they did, they looked at they looked at all of those, and they looked at what other people are thinking about that, and they've seen that there are 13 different dimensions across those three pillars, and they have 46 different drivers. So they looked when they talked about technology, they were actually looking at how how companies are using architecture, how those companies are talking, and how they are dealing with different infrastructures and different platforms when they're deploying their applications, what their practices for testing, and what is their practices for using different type of tools. And then they start looking on the other side at working practices, like what kind of engineering practices. So what exactly do they do? Do they have a quality mindset? Do they look at do they really apply the engineering principles when they are doing their own development and when they're trying to work with their own company? How they apply security and compliance, how much they are influenced by compliance, for instance. Do they prefer open source or inner source? And do they have a culture for allowing people to work on open source projects? And do they use any agile team practice in order to be able to have better outcomes? And then last but not least, they looked at organizational enablement, and they start looking at how teams are formed and how exactly do they work. They looked at what their the product management capabilities and how exactly do they apply those. They looked at organizational agility. In other words, not how we do development, but how we as an organization are able to to be agile and create business outcomes based on the current situations that we have. They looked at the culture of the company, and last but not least, they looked at talent. So how they would actually work with talent. And believe it or not, when they start looking at that, they found a correlation. I don't know if correlation is causation. We like to think that this is the thing, and we like, and we know that business people really, really like the numbers and really like to see that there is actually a result connected to the things that they are doing. So companies that are, have a higher developer velocity index generally outperform the market. So they have a higher revenue growth and they have a higher innovation. So when they looked at that, they realized that this is something that a lot of companies should maybe start looking into. And what they did, they look as well at, all the tools and all the things. And one of the things that they as well observed was that companies that are using tools, best-in-class tools, are 65% more innovative. I'm not really sure how exactly they calculate that innovation index, but it feels like they are actually, they see that the products that they are coming out of those particular companies are much quicker to reach the market, and they are, they have a much better business performance as a company. And they looked as well at developer satisfaction. So they had a higher developer retention. So people are not moving across organization or across companies if they get to have the good tools. And I had an interesting chat with a friend of mine. He's working as a digital strateg at SAB, and we're talking exactly about that. Like, how come that if you use the best tools, people are actually doing a very good job? And his theory, and I think it actually make quite a lot of sense, was that when people are trusted to choose their own tools, they are doing the right thing. So if as an employer, I will go to my people and say, you know what, whatever tools you need, this is your budget. Start buying your tools and use the tools that you need, not the tools that I think you need, because I might not know what exactly helps you as a developer, but you know exactly what you need. So starting to have this kind of attitude towards developers make them actually do a much better job. And he was using his own experience as an example. And you see that people that are trusted, by their own managers and doing the right thing, they are actually doing the right thing, and they're not, and they're making sure that they are satisfied as well with the work that they are doing. So when McKinsey started looking at this, they realized that the companies that are in the top 25% with the digital with the developer velocity index, they are growing 4 to 5 times faster than the other companies. So the rest, the 75%. Now as well, they have 55%. They score 55% higher on innovation. And again, this is not necessarily a causation, but they found this correlation, and I think it more talks to exactly the thing that as a company, when you start doing those kind of things, and when you start trusting your developers, and when you start investing in the in the right things, then it will automatically improve the quality of the business. Now, one of the top, the first differentiator actually for the top performers was the use of open source. So up to like 5 years ago, most of the enterprises were more or less against open source. So they were preferring things developed in-house, or they didn't want to take any dependencies on that. And once they started to use the open source, they saw an increase in productivity. They saw an increase on innovation. Another key differentiator was the public cloud adoption. So again, companies that started to move to the cloud had a very clear advantage over the other companies, especially on the non-digital companies. So I'm not talking about companies that are seen as digital, native companies, but the companies that the technology is just one. It's something that enables the business. So those companies, that made the move to the cloud got better results. Another one aspect was that companies that were empowering citizen developers, or what they are called as well no-code or low-code developers. So those developers that they can take those kind of applications like Power BI and the Power Platform and create workflows and create dashboards, as well have a better innovation. Why? Because they are able to see correlations. They are able to get a better insight into what the company is doing. And one of the things that was as well very clear was those companies that started to use artificial intelligence and machine learning and RPAs and product telemetry. Again, they got an accelerated impact, because once you know about how your product is used and once you know exactly what people are looking for, it's easier for you to give them what they need. So when you look at the developer velocity is, I would say, it's like everything else. It's a 3-step program, So the first step being to build a foundation. So once you start building the foundation, you want to make sure that you have an effective developer toolchain. So you don't want your developers to lose a lot of time with the tools that they are using. You want the tools to be, to just do their job, to be, magic, to be not distinguishable from magic, actually, So they are there, they are helping the developer to do his job. You want to have a good product management capability. So in other words, you need to create the right product with the right tools and make sure that the product is, and it's used in the correct way. You want to make sure as well that you have a good culture, and you have the psychological safety of fail fast and learning. So instead of sitting there and trying to fix things 2 years after after you realize that might have been a mistake, failing fast and starting from scratch, it's actually a very good way to create a good foundation. And last but not least, we have the talent management part as well. So you need to make sure that you have a good way to recruit and incentivize your talent. You need to have stuff like identifying them and how you can retain them and how you can reward them, and so on. So all those companies, again, they got better results. The other, after building the foundation, we need to accelerate the impact. So we know we have a good way, of developing the things that we need to develop. We know that we have the good, we know that we have the right products created for the right reason. We know how we can recruit the good talent. But how can we make it faster? How can we accelerate that impact? So apparently using stuff like open source, and using those capabilities of open source will empower your developers much more, and it would be the #1 differentiator when you look at those, those companies with higher developer velocity index. Public cloud adoption is another one that you could actually use to accelerate the impact. And last but not least, empowering your citizen developers will give you another, will give you a higher return on innovation. So you would get people doing things much quicker or fail much quicker at the end of the day. And last but not least, you need to use, you need to be able to transform the future. So that you transform the future by using AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And with the, I think with the new, with the upcoming of the cloud, we got into a situation where we, machine learning, it's not, it's not an, I would say it's not a luxury, it's a commodity now. I would say 3-4 years ago, it was almost impossible for any company to do anything, with big data, mainly because they lacked the compute power. So the only solution they had at the time was to buy a lot of hardware that would be used to train some models, and then nothing more. Or maybe buying into some big data center that would be able to do that for them. But again, you have a lot of things with, a lot of hassle with transferring the data and making sure that you do the right thing. So with the rise of the cloud, I would say a lot of those things became now a commodity. As a developer, it's pretty easy for me to start using them. However, I'm still a little bit cautious about that. I know Microsoft is promoting the ML.NET, where you can just give the data and then it will come with kind of an algorithm telling you, you should apply that, and that would be the prediction, or that would be the things that I would get out of the data. I'm not really sure that's the, I mean, it might work in many cases, but I'm really convinced that, if you really want to have an impact, you would really need you'd need a data scientist, or you need a data engineer, so someone that knows exactly how to clean the data, how to work with the data, and what kind of algorithms were actually pertaining to the type of data that you were using. And of course, based on that, using the machine learning, you can have, you can see patterns and you can see things that you could use. And then you have, what we call artificial intelligence. Another thing would be life site automation. So instead of waiting for your system to crash and burn, you might get some predictive analytics that will tell you, what, it seems that this might be, we've seen that in the past, and that looked like something that that led to a crash. But you can actually start looking into, or if you get this information ahead of time, then you might start remediating and you might start working and doing something else. And of course, having a good product telemetry, you would understand exactly how your product is used, and having this understanding, you might actually see where it's worth investing the money, where it's worth doing things, that you are normally wouldn't have that insight. So you might concentrate on the wrong feature and nobody is using them. Having the telemetry, however, will allow you to do that. And so looking at all those things, developer velocity actually is about, it's at the end of the day, it's about three things. It's how you build productively. So how can you make sure that as a developer, we can actually, we can be productive. We don't have to lose a lot of time doing things that do not create anything, doing things that actually can be easily automated. You want to make sure that you can collaborate across the border and in a secure fashion. And now with the Corona, I think it's more important than ever that you are able to do that. Think about it, that this report was actually pre-Corona. I would say that they did the whole, the whole research prior to the outbreak of Corona, and they still saw that having a global collaboration and being able to do a secure collaboration across those channels, it makes it much, you are actually you have a higher successful rate when you're working. And then we have a scale innovation. So how can we make sure that we can actually innovate and we can grow that innovation? We can scale it up. And again, this was a very important discovery. So now, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm working for Microsoft. So how does Microsoft actually fit into all these things? We have as a mission to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And one of the things that we are doing, we are actually working with tools. And our tools are actually voted by the Stack Overflow community as being the best tools. Both Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio are actually quite high up on that particular list. We have stuff like Visual Studio Live Share. If you haven't seen that, I would really recommend to look at it. It's working with Visual Studio Code, and Visual Studio Code, the way I like to call it, is it's a smarter notepad. It's just a text editor, but you have the possibility to add a lot of plugins, or to make it even closer to the Java theme. It's actually it's an Eclipse in Visual Studio cloth, so it looks like Visual Studio, but behaves a lot like Eclipse. You need the plugins to be able to do the things that you need to do. And a lot of plugins that are used in there are actually helping you to do your job correctly. And there is another thing that we have. It's called Visual Studio Code Spaces, and the Visual Studio Code Spaces, it's a possibility. It's the possibility for us to create an online, code editor. So instead of downloading the code on my own machine, I can just create an instance of this Visual Studio Code Space, and I can have all the tool chain and all the things in a container somewhere in the cloud that I can just go in and edit code without having to install anything locally, in order to be able to to test some things and make sure that some things are working. And of course, if I see that this is something that I need to work more with, I can get all the code on my machine, I can install all the tool chains, I can do all the things that I need. But before doing that, I can actually use Visual Studio Code Spaces to do the work I need. Now, the other part is, like I mentioned, open source. The biggest differentiator is the use of open source. And I know that our former manager, Steve Ballmer, was completely against open source, and a lot of people still remember that about him and about Microsoft. But as of 2 years ago already, Microsoft was one of the biggest open source contributors on the planet. A lot of people from Microsoft were encouraged to contribute to open source projects, and actually we do. I'm maintaining 2 different the projects that I'm working with on my spare time, and it does, it is encouraged as well to do that. And one of the things that we have actually, or Microsoft owns, is GitHub. And GitHub is is a platform that is used more or less by almost 2/3 of the developers in one form or another. And that gives a lot of, that gives us a lot of, I would say, both power and responsibility, because that, with great power comes great responsibility, and that's what we're actually, I think we are doing. I had some discussions about about the things that and the reasons why Microsoft did it, and I still don't know why Microsoft chose to to buy GitHub at the time, because it felt like a I think the economical model of GitHub at the time was not something that will bring money. And I think what GitHub needed someone with the money, and I think Microsoft was that company with the money. But this is this is Tibi. This is not Tibi, the Microsoft guy. This is Tibi, the private the private guy trying to make some some assumptions or some guessing why why that. But I think that it had a good a longer term, and was exactly about on the line with empowering every people and every organization on the planet to achieve more kind of thinking. And of course, GitHub and Azure work pretty well together. Microsoft has 2, I would say, competing products. It's both GitHub Actions now and Azure DevOps. So if you are into DevOps and you want to create CI and CD pipelines, you can use 2 different technologies. But GitHub has now GitHub Actions that allows you to do deployment not only on Azure. You can use it to deploy on AWS, on GCP. So whatever whatever your platform or whatever your cloud it is, you can use GitHub Actions for that. And the last part would be the scale on innovation. So again, if we look at the scale on innovation, the business impact that we are having is 4 times higher when you start using cloud platforms. And of course, Microsoft is the one behind Azure. So we do have Azure, which is I would venture to say it's the best platform as a service cloud, and is the second best infrastructure as a service cloud as it is right now. And that's not my it's both my personal opinion, but there are numbers that are talking about that. And of course, what you want to do, you want to make sure that you have you close the talent gap. So you have the good people working for you, and you want to make sure that everyone in your organization can be a developer. And again, we do that by using tools like Power Apps and Power BIs, and that makes it much easier for someone with not that doesn't have a coding background to be able to create all those workflows and business process modeling tools in order to be able to test assumptions and make sure that things are working the way they are supposed to work. So when we talk about that, so we have I would say as Microsoft, we as a company, we have one of the most popular developer tool chain. When you look at that, we have GitHub, we have Azure, we have Visual Studio, and we have Power Apps. So we can we can talk about all of them. So now, when we talk about developer velocity, there are some resources. So there is a developer velocity site that's you can actually find it in several places. But we have if you go to azure.com/developer velocity, you will find you'll find some tools. You'll find some webinars about it if you want to look, some links to some YouTube videos, again, that will help you make decisions about that. And there is an assessment. So I did that as a pure curiosity, just to see exactly, based on my previous company and what I know we were doing, and how exactly would we place amongst other companies in the same industry. So the way I mean, if you take that with a I would say, if you take the assessment as a in an objective way and try to respond based on what your current status is, not what you would like it to be, I think you will get a fair picture about where exactly you are in this compared with others. So when you look at that, when you go to the developer velocity assessment, what you're going to get there is actually, you're going to fill in some information. You would need to log in there or to use a Microsoft account in order to be able to get back to the results later on and see exactly what you were doing. And once you complete the assessment, you will get a report telling you exactly, where you are at and what you can do to improve. Now, the questions themselves were very, I would say, were very insightful, because when you look at them, you would realize, okay, so maybe if I would do that a little bit different, that would make me have a higher index. So looking at those made me as well realize that, those are the things that we as an organization or we as a company need to use in order to be able to, to increase our index. Now, there are some resources. So when you look at those, there is a report. There is the report itself that McKinsey created. It is guarded. You need to give your email address in order to download the resource. There is another good. If you look at developer velocity site, there is another report which is called DevOps in the Enterprise. So it's not really, it's not about Microsoft, it's not about developer velocity, but it's about how DevOps can help your company actually, deliver better time to market for your products and better innovation. There are some, if you want to look at the developer velocity assessment, there is a Power BI dashboard that you can look later on and see exactly where you are at. And there are some webinars for technology decision maker and for business decision maker that you can have a look at and try to get more details about those. So how you can use that. So that's about that was my I would say my short pitch about developer velocity. I really think it's a very interesting subject. I like to look at it as the next step after DevOps, because looking at the things that are measured when you calculate your index would help you actually have a better communication with your business peers and making sure that they understand the value that we as developers can bring to the business. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So questions.
I will stop the recording.